The brother spoke to his younger sister. The sun god Utu spoke to Inanna, saying, "Young lady, the flax in its fullness is lovely. Inanna, the grain is glistening in the furrow. I will hoe it for you. I will bring it to you. A piece of linen, big or small, is always needed. Inanna, I will bring it to you."
Brother, after you've brought me the flax, who will comb it for me?
"Sister, I will bring it to you combed."
Utu, after you've brought it to me combed, who will spin it for me?
"Inanna, I will bring it to you spun."
Brother, after you've brought the flax to me spun, who will braid it for me?
"Sister, I will bring it to you braided."
Utu, after you've brought it to me braided, who will warp it for me?
"Inanna, I will bring it to you warped."
Brother, after you've brought the flax to me warped, who will weave it for me?
"Sister, I will bring it to you woven."
Utu, after you've brought it to me woven, who will bleach it for me?
"Inanna, I will bring it to you bleached."
Brother, after you've brought my bridal sheet to me, who will go to bed with me? Utu, who will go to bed with me?
"Sister, your bridegroom will go to bed with you. He who is born from a fertile womb, he who is conceived on the sacred marriage throne. Tamuzi, the shepherd, he will go to bed with you."
No, brother, the man of my heart works the hoe, the farmer. He is a man of my heart. He gathers the grain into great heaps. He brings the grain into my storehouses.
"Sister, marry the shepherd. Why are you unwilling? His cream is good. His milk is good. Whatever he touches shines brightly. Inanna, marry Dumuzi. You who adorn yourself with the agate necklace of fertility, why are you unwilling? Dumuzi will share his rich cream with you. You who are meant to be the king's protector, why are you unwilling?
The shepherd? I will not marry the shepherd. His clothes are coarse, his wool is rough. I will marry the farmer. The farmer grows flax for my clothes. The farmer grows barley for my table.
Dumuzi spoke. "Why do you speak about the farmer? Why do you speak about him? If he gives you black flour, I will give you black wool. If he gives you white flour, I will give you white wool. If he gives you beer, I will give you sweet milk. If he gives you bread, I will give you honey cheese. I will give the farmer my leftover cream. I will give the farmer my leftover milk. Why do you speak about the farmer? What does he have more than I do?"
Shepherd, without my mother Ningal, you'd be driven away. Without my grandmother Ningikua, you'd be driven into the steppes. Without my father Nana, you'd have no roof. And without my brother Utu...
"Inanna, do not start a quarrel. My father Enki is as good as your father Nana. My mother Surtur is as good as your mother Ningal. My sister Gishtanana is as good as yours. Queen of the palace, let us talk it over. Inanna, let us sit and speak together. I am as good as Utu. Enki is as good as Nana. Surtur is as good as Ningal. Queen of the palace, let us talk it over." The word they had spoken was a word of desire. From the starting of the quarrel came the lover's desire. The shepherd went to the royal house with cream. Dumuzi went to the royal house with milk. Before the door he called out, "Open the house, my lady! Open the house!" Inanna ran to Ningal, the mother who bore her. Ningal counseled her daughter, saying, "My child, the young man will be your father. My daughter, the young man will be your mother. He will treat you like a father. He will care for you like a mother. Open the house, my lady. Open the house." Inanna, at her mother's command, bathed and anointed herself with scented oil. She covered her body with the royal white robe. She readied her dowry. She arranged her precious lapis beads around her neck. She took her seal in her hand. Dumuzi waited expectantly. Inanna opened the door for him. Inside the house she shone before him like the light of the moon. Dumuzi looked at her joyously. He pressed his neck close against hers. The king Dumuzi kissed his wife Inanna. Salutations from space, folks. This is Gemini Brett, the astronaut of More Than Astrology, and celestial navigator of the StarryTelling Podcast. You just heard a reading from Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, translations of the Sumerian tablets by Diane Wolkenstein and Samuel Kramer, and that was original music by the most magical Marya Stark and video by Elijah Parker. I am absolutely ecstatic to have on the horn with me today Mr. Gary Caton of DreamAstrology.com. Gary, how in the heavens are you?
I am heavenly, sir. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, it's a wonderful day. Today is September 1st, 2015. Mars' Day, a Tuesday. And in the wee morning hours on the East Coast, or just before midnight here on the West Coast, Venus and Mars made their second longitudinal conjunction of this year of 2015. Taurus was on the rise here in the West Coast, and Gemini, where you are in Wilmington, North Carolina, Gary. So I picked out the Mercury cup to pour some tea for you.
Thank you, sir.
And I guess I'll just have to drink that when we're done, since we're a few time zones away from one another.
You mean I'm not going to stick my lips up to the camera?
We could try that. Last time it didn't treat my computer so well. So, DreamAstrologer.com. Gary, why this name? Could you tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. Dream Astrologer is a sort of a screen name that I came up with because astrology found me and through a dream that I was given back in 1993 on April Fool's Day. I'm not sure what the joke is quite yet. I'm still figuring it out. But on April Fool's Day, I awoke from a dream that was the culmination of a series of dreams. These were not your regular everyday dreams of emotional processing and stuff that you do. These were really heavily archetypal dreams in color. Symbols like crosses and wells and stuff had been coming up in my consciousness. And in the last one, I saw the sun blazing in the sky and the symbol for Venus, with the circle of spirit with the cross of matter underneath inside the solar disk. And I was like, whoa, man, I have to figure out what the hell that's all about. So I managed to get an ephemeris. I've still got it here. My trusty old, I don't know if you can see exactly how beaten up this thing is, but it's been through rainbow gatherings and countless, workshops and whatnot. And I figured out that, hey, check it out. There was a Venus-Sun conjunction in Aries on the day I had that dream. And it was like, whoa, okay, you got it. And so I was living in a house without power at the time because I was working on this house for this lady, sort of building steps. It was like this old shell of a house, old farmhouse that was being restored. So I was up at night with a candle, flipping through this ephemeris going, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. And the rest, as they say, is history. But that's just sort of a nod to my spiritual roots as a dream astrologer. That's how I came into this deal. And actually, that was the sort of the middle phase of a long process of spiritual seeking that I had been doing already for several years. So that was actually, in alchemy, they would call that the albedo phase, right? So that there's this blinding white light that appears as you come out of the tunnel from the Negredo, from the underworld, from the journey into the dark cave of your own ignorance, your own spiritual ignorance and inexperience. And then after you transverse that darkness, so oftentimes when you're entering in, you see, symbols like caves. And in my case, it was a crow. The crow is a very common symbol in alchemy of the Negredo, the blackening, where you have to go through the putrefaction and the purification of your of your previous life before you can see the light, the new vision and so that idea of that spiritual transformation is a process that has a map, has been behind all of my astrological explorations ever since, because that was the nature of the experience I was in as I found astrology, you see.
And Gary, I first heard these alchemical terms like negredo and albedo from your mouth when you spoke at the Shamanic Astrology Conference last year in 2014, and it just blew me away. And it was like you were handing me this vocabulary that was helping me understand my own experience and my own spiritual investigations. And folks, since that time, I've taken up a study with Gary, something I highly recommend you all do, because Gary is an astrological pioneer and a student of the old ways too. So the talk that you gave, Gary, was about this research that you've done into Venus and Mars. And folks, Venus and Mars, they have visibly these 3 different types of relationships over the course of 6.5 years. They can do a long dance together in the evening sky, followed by a short meeting in the morning, much later on. They can have a quick little kiss in the underworld, too close to the sun for anyone to see. Or like this year, where they met briefly in the evening sky in February. It was February 21st Pacific time, and the very early degrees of Aries. And Mars then disappeared from our view for a while, going into the underworld. And that was around April 17th of this year, 2015. He popped out around August 4th, reborn again in the morning sky. And since that time, Venus went retrograde on July 25th, dove really quickly under the beams, and has since appeared in the morning sky to meet Mars again there. And they will travel together for months in the morning. So today marks their second exact zodiacal conjunction. It's at the 15th degree of Leo, right at the Lammas point, a point where we celebrate harvest and abundance when the sun is there at the cross quarter. And Venus will kind of rise above Mars, check him out for some time, and they'll come back together. Very close conjunction on November 2nd, 2015. So we know this happens visibly, but as far as exact mathematical conjunctions, 3 in 1 year has not gone down since 1996, and before then since 1966. And in a sense, this is a bit of an aberration, and this is what Gary's bringing forth.
Yeah, to be clear, the 3 in 1 year, with the middle one being Venus retrograde, hasn't happened since 96. There was one also in the in the 70s and in the 90s. So there's only been 2 conjunctions of Venus with Mars, where Venus was retrograde, since the 60s.
Because the other thing that she can do is, as she's slowing down to station direct, Mars is then fast enough to overcome her, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very weird thing, right? Because in astrology, right, we know that the planets have certain speeds, and that generally speaking, Venus is much faster than Mars. And so you don't really think that, Venus goes around the sun in 1 year and Mars in 2. So she's at least twice as fast as him. She usually covers a sign in about a month in her average motion. So most people don't even consider the fact that, every once in a while, Mars passes Venus. And so it's like, whoa, what's that about, right? It's like, how does that work? What's going on there? That was essentially the impetus for all this research that I did, because, I had never really heard anybody really outline that sufficiently to satisfy my curiosity. And so I was like, what is that about? Like, let's look at this. And the further down the rabbit hole I went, the more wide the view became until I had stacks of paper this thick with thousands of years of Venus-Mars conjunctions outlined. And I was still going, what the hell is going on here? But eventually, like as in the dream, I came out the other side, right? And I got a vision of what this thing is really about. And so, yeah, it's really fascinating that right now Mars is passing Venus. Mars is faster than Venus longitudinally. And yet, at the same time, what that means visually is that before Mars was here in the sky and Venus was like about here when they were rising in diurnal motion each morning, right? But as Mars passes Venus in longitude, she begins to rise above him in the morning sky. So that she's actually leading the parade across the ascendant, if you will, into the morning hours, whereas before he was leading the parade. And so this is one of the things that I found very interesting that is hardly ever talked about in astrology, is this sense of who's leading the parade, who's rising first, and what does that say about their relationship? And so, I had some preliminary, probably preliminary is the best way to put it, some pretty solid, I think, based on the research that I did, ideas, but certainly, preliminary in the sense that very basic. But as I was forming them, I had experiences that would sort of bear them out in a way that was like undeniable. As an astrologer who again came about this, I always sort of looked to life as a teacher of astrology as much as any book, right? So one of the first things I did is I used to write down my transits, and then I would say, okay, life, teach me what this transit is about, see what happens today. Oh, that's what that's about. And in the same way, as I was doing this Venus-Mars research, I was thinking, okay, so what does it mean when one rises before the other? Well, I just happened to be part of a team of 3 people who were putting on this event in the Bahamas, this first Sky Astrology conference at the first Venus-Mars conjunction on the vernal point. And as we were planning this, we got into this sort of situation where there was this police contingent that was interested in coming, but they needed papers, and it's a very complex situation. But suffice it to say, out of the 3 members, there was one of us who wanted to just act immediately. Just give them the papers. Yeah, let's go. And then I was on the other side, and I was like, well, hang on a minute. Maybe we should get more information. Maybe we should figure out, is this really going to be worth it for us to invest all this energy? And then there was someone who was kind of in the middle going, well, I can kind of see. And guess what?
Well, I can guess, right? The one who was ready to just go for it has Mars rising first.
Mars is rising first in her chart.
For you, it's Venus rising.
Let's go. And she had all the stuff ready, and I'm like, okay.
Gary, I think what I'll do here is cut in just a little tutorial on diurnal motion and how you can tell whether Venus or Mars is rising first on your chart.
Okay.
All right, folks, here's the chart for August 31st, 2015, 10:03 p.m. in Seattle, the retrograde Venus-Mars conjunction in Leo. I know these charts can look confusing, but they're just this, our solar system. Here's the Venus-Mars conjunction as seen from Earth. If we look down on the solar system from way above Earth's North Pole, the planets move in this counterclockwise direction. This is zodiacal motion. Watch the moon, and you can see the days moving forward through time in the upper right corner there. Zodiacal motion on the chart is counterclockwise. The planets, when moving direct anyway, moving forward through the signs of the zodiac. Now, an astrological chart is actually a geocentric or Earth-centered map of the solar system for a moment in time. We do live on the Earth, after all. Well, most of us anyway. It's easy to see, right? Here's Venus and Mars together, Jupiter and the Sun together, Mercury. Over here, Venus and Mars together, Jupiter and the Sun together, and Mercury, Saturn, Pluto, Neptune, Moon, Uranus. Saturn, Pluto, Neptune, Moon, Uranus. Geocentric. So what's in the middle of an astrological chart? That's right. Your planet, the Earth. Now, the diurnal planetary motion is opposite to their zodiacal motion. Diurnal means daily. We know our days are an effect of the Earth spinning on its axis. When we look from above the North Pole, the Earth spins in this direction, counterclockwise on the chart. So the effect that we see from here on Earth is the planets and the stars moving clockwise, rising or ascending in the east at the rising sign or the ascendant, culminating at the top of the chart, and setting or descending on the right of the chart at the setting sign or the descendant. Everything below the horizon line is in the southern hemisphere sky if we're looking from the northern hemisphere. We've got to dim it down to my low budget night view because the sun is below the horizon, so it's nighttime, right? And we can use this genius software Sky Engine to animate this chart and watch diurnal motion in action. One thing you'll see is that Venus is going to rise before Mars. Just slightly before Mars, but we would call this a Venus first chart because astrology is a very precise science. Yeah, I said it, science. Jupiter rising, here comes sunrise. And now we can't see the planets anymore because the sun's out, right? We're not going to visibly see Venus and Mars culminating here or Jupiter culminating here. We will see the sun. That happens around noon, right? We're not going to see Venus and Mars setting over here. But when the sun sets, we can see Mercury, evening star. Saturn is an evening star. If planets are forward in zodiacal motion from the sun, they are evening stars. If they are behind or clockwise to the sun, they are morning stars like Venus and Mars, morning stars here. And each day before their third 2015 conjunction on November 2nd, Venus will rise earlier and earlier ahead of Mars. Now I'm taking it back to January 11th, 2015, which featured a rather astrologasmic evening sky with Mercury, Venus, and Mars all visible. Here's an image I took from the middle of nowhere in Mexico at that time. So back to the chart, and I'm going to strip away everything but Mercury, Mars, Venus, and the sun. So we can see that the sun had set. We'll take that away. And now you can see how this chart is this image. Let's take Mercury out of here, and we're going to watch the dance of Venus and Mars through time to analyze this idea of which is rising first on a chart, Venus or Mars. I've put Earth back in the middle because we're going to move too fast to keep up with daytime versus nighttime. All we need to know for now is that the planet that is in earlier zodiacal degrees will rise first because diurnal motion is opposite to zodiacal motion. So if I move this over to the eastern horizon, you can see how Venus is rising before Mars. Now let's move this through time. Once Venus passes Mars, that's that conjunction February 21st, now Mars is going to rise first. Can you see that? Just use your mind to turn that wheel counterclockwise until these planets are rising. So that's been the case since February 21st at that Venus-Mars conjunction. But here at the second Venus-Mars conjunction on August 31st, you can see now that Venus is going to be rising first until their third conjunction of this year, November 2nd. Now Mars is rising first. Can you see that? So when they're close to one another, you can always determine whether your chart is Venus first or Mars first by which of the two planets is in earlier degrees of the zodiac. It gets a little bit more confusing when we approach opposition between Venus and Mars. The next Venus-Mars opposition will open in a theater called You on May 24th, 2016, featuring Venus under the beams of the Sun in the underworld and a Jupiter-Saturn-Neptune mutable T-square at the nodes. But don't worry about all of that for now. You can see how this is a rather balanced Venus-Mars chart. She is basically setting as he rises. But after the Venus-Mars opposition, it's a Venus chart. Easier to see that if I move ahead by a few days. And then you'll see that before Venus rises, Mars sets. See that? And every day we move forward, it's going to be more of an extreme Venus first chart. Now in the days before the opposition, go back a few days before that May 24th opposition, you can see how this is a Mars chart. Venus is setting before Mars rises, so Mars rises first. Now let's take a look at a couple of chart examples. We'll start with my neediest client. It's like every morning this guy wakes me up to ask me what transits are happening today, where's he at with his progressions, and I usually answer because, well, of course, he's me. So what is it, folks? Is this a Mars first chart or a Venus first chart? That's right, Mars rises first. And in a sense, that would suggest shoot first, ask questions later. But we have to understand that this is Mars in Cancer. So what's that guy shooting anyway? Last pop quiz is my chart a day chart or a night chart? Because Gary and I will get into that later in this interview. That's right, it's night. The sun is below the horizon. 7:39 p.m. in late October. Boston, Massachusetts might give that away as well. Now to the chart of Mr. Gary Caton. Is it Venus first or Mars first? That's right, Venus rises first, so feel before you shoot. But why would Venus want to shoot anything? Well, she is Aries after all, as is the sun. So is this a day chart or a night chart? That's right, nighttime, the sun is below the horizon. And the final piece of the pop quiz, is Venus a morning star or an evening star? What about Mars? Right, Venus is a morning star, rising before the sun. And Mars is an evening star, setting after the sun. Now let's guess one. Mars first or Venus first for Mr. Shane Dickey? That's right. Mars first. Shoot first, ask questions later. Just ask his hunting buddies. And now back to something more peaceful and stimulating. Ladies and gentlemen, from Asheville, North Carolina, and DreamAstrologer.com, Mr. Gary Caton. And now we're back. And so we hear, as you speak about Venus and Mars, her and him,
Yeah.
she and he. And though Venus has always been associated with the goddess, Inanna and Aphrodite, and Mars with the god Ares and perhaps Dumuzi, the old ways of astrology did not necessarily look at this conjunction of Venus and Mars as this beautiful thing of yin and yang. I've been looking at this dance this year, much from your teaching, also from the teachings of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, and of my own experience, these three conjunctions of Venus and Mars, as an opportunity to rewrite relationship to relationship itself. I think the North Node in Libra, which has been there since February 18th, 2014, and will be until November 11th of this year, is another expression of this. But this kind of hinges on this idea that Venus is yin and Mars is yang. And that's not necessarily always been the expression. Do you know when that came about in the astrological realms?
Well, we actually had a little bit of a discussion about this on Facebook, with the sense of how the initial mythology, even of Inanna, from a feminist point of view, could be seen as something of a demotion, something of a neediness or weakness on her part, and neediness for male energy and stuff. Some of the feminists read that as kind of a demotion from a previous state of pretty much being the ish, if you will. The feminine was, think about it, to a person who has no modern medical understanding of the body, the fact that life issues forth from this being that you happen to be lucky enough to share an abode with, it's like, whoa, like, yeah, wow. And so, it's hard to tell where that transition happened exactly, but, certainly for the Greeks, it seems that they had a different, their Aphrodite was quite a different character than Inanna. That seems obvious to me, and it's interesting because the Greeks are quite different in other ways, for the Egyptians, for instance. And I should just say here briefly that, basically there's three eras of astrology, if you will, right? The era that you and I come up in, and everyone who's practicing today, regardless of what they actually study, they're modern people, they're modern astrologers, and that, so pretty much since like the 1700s, we have what's called the modern astrology movement. Now, in the medieval era and what's called the Hellenistic era, that's what we call the classical era of astrology. And then before the Hellenistic era, Hellenistic era is the post-Alexandrian conquest era of history, roughly between 200 BC and 200 AD, when there was this great mixing of cultures, right? Because Alexander, though he conquered everyone, he let them keep their culture. He says, do as you will, just pay me tribute, And so there was this great mixing. Now, before that, there was 2,000 years of astrology that was quite different from what we call horoscopic astrology, that is chart-based astrology, right? These round wheels, that's the first meaning of horoscope. Your chart is a horoscope. That thing that you read in the Sunday paper is something else. But prior to, the horoscopic astrology, there was a visual and a cyclic astrology that came to us from the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians. And it's interesting because their languages, especially the Egyptians, were pictorial. They were symbol driven, image driven. And that's a different deal than the Greek alphabet, right? So there's really two kinds of consciousness that are also reflected in these two eras of astrology that come before the modern astrology. There's the Greek alphabet and there's the Egyptian image. And these are like two, right brain, left brain. These are like two radically different ways of looking at things. Neither is right or wrong. You get a lot of this stuff nowadays about, the patriarchy and blah, blah, blah. Well, it would be just as unhealthy for the matriarchy to dominate one dominant over the other is not what we want. We want a successful mixture and to be able to come at them from both sides. So certainly when the Greeks took over, things changed. They had for instance, Venus in their mythology came from the genitals. Well, came from the interaction of the genitals of Uranus with the sea, and out of the foam of that, right? Because Kronos castrated Uranus, right, and hurled the genitals into the sea, and out of this, and when the blood hit the ground, arose the Furies arose from that, and when the phallus hit the sea, Venus arose from that. So right away you can begin to see, oh, wait a second, there's the Furies and there's Venus. So right away they've separated this one side of Venus that the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Akkadians and all those Mesopotamian cultures seem to embrace a bit more, to me. And that is the solar, what we call the solar feminine. Yes, a very aggressive, powerful, and power seeking and power knowing type of feminine. And the Greeks said, yeah, we're going to put that over here.
Right, and I mean, though Venus in the morning was seen, we think, as Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan to the Mexica and the Mayan astrologers, this wasn't necessarily the greatest time, right? When Venus is rising in the morning sky, this is kind of bolt the doors. And
they would, very similar to the way that other cultures would beat pots and pans when a comet appeared. They would do the same thing, like sort of like, they saw her as literally as dripping with gore from the dead bodies that she encountered in her underworld journey.
Yikes!
Yeah.
Right, so many different worldviews. I mean, one thing it seemed like you were about to touch on earlier was that in Egypt, Geb, the earth, was the father, was the masculine, and Nut was the sky, right?
The great goddess of the Milky Way, arching across the sky and lowering herself onto Geb each day, and how similar, but except reversed, to Gaia and Uranus, yeah? The same, but totally reversed.
It's fun to go out for a walk and try to connect to Father Earth. It feels so funky in our times, But these worldviews shift, and one thing that really came in, I know a work that you speak of often is the alphabet versus the goddess, right? And this kind of idea of left brain and right brain. And maybe as we're shifting back from, matriarchy to patriarchy or whatever, like that, all the roles shift. But one thing that seems so true to me is that you don't have the yin without the yang. You don't have the yang without the yin. No doubt the feminine is creator, right? I mean, she gives birth. This was well known long ago. And in the Hindu systems, that energy is the Shakti. It is the creative force, but it expresses itself through the Shiva, right? Through the masculine force. I like to see this even with Venus between us and the sun and Mars on the other side. It's like she is the inhale. She's bringing in that solar force, that energy, and then he exhales it right out into interstellar space. So when we talk about the yin and the yang, or the feminine and the masculine, these beautiful terms that you brought to me from the alchemical tradition have really informed my study and my practice. And this is the feminine as the fixed and the masculine as the volatile. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that, Gary.
Yeah, the fixed and the volatile are two principles in alchemy where they, basically, when you're talking about the actual, lab alchemy, the chemical side of things, which was very much proto-chemistry, you have certain kinds of compounds that are basically inert. And you have other kinds of compounds that are very corrosive, or will, that once they contact something, they will, eat it up or set it on fire, or, they're volatile. And generally speaking, when these two kinds of things meet, the fixed and the volatile, you get, a reaction. So, that's where it comes from in terms of the lab alchemy, but we can see it very clearly in the astronomy of the planets. Venus was used by the Mayans as a calendar calibrator, in the sense that if ever they got off a little bit, they knew they could always come back to Venus, because her orbit of the visible planets is the most perfectly circular. She has the most regular alignments every 584 days, boom, boom, like clockwork, right? So Venus is the fixed in terms of the astronomy, very clearly. Mars, on the other hand, is all over the place, man. I mean, there's still discussion about, whether or not he has 7 or 8 different synodic cycles. There's, he can show up, for instance, if we just follow the times when Mars returns, he can show up. He has a synodic return of about 15 years and one of about 17 years. So that would be either 7 or 8 cycles. And it's only by combining those that you get, for instance, the 32 and so on. So Mars is less reliable, and actually what that means astronomically is his orbit's more like a paperclip, whereas Venus is more like a nice circle, right? He's got what they call eccentricity in his orbit.
And she makes this beautiful 5-petaled rose that repeats every 8 Earth years, 13 Venus years. They make 5 contacts, this perfect, harmonic, fixed, beautiful pentagram.
Yeah. It's phi, the golden mean.
If you're turning a multiple of 8, then you're in a Venus Synodic Return year. So I can show this to you. I'll show this now. We're going to take a look at this Leo Venus Synodic cycle from space, beginning August 15th, 2015, the day of the Venus Sun interior conjunction in Leo. Venus between Earth and Sun, which happens every 584 days. Always with Venus retrograde, because she's passing Earth. And just like passing cars on the highway makes them to appear backwards, so it is with the planets. Now we'll move forward through time from that interior conjunction point, and we'll get to this next significant stage of the Venus cycle, though there's many in between. And this is June 6, 2016. This is the Venus-Sun exterior conjunction. Now it looks like an opposition, Venus on the other side of the Sun from Earth, but an opposition is the other side of Earth from the Sun, like Mars here on May 22nd, 2016, right? That's a full Mars. Mars is bright as he gets, as close as he gets to Earth. But on June 6, 2016, this Venus alignment, that's as far as she gets from Earth. And she's certainly not bright in our sky. She can't be seen. She's on the other side of the Sun. That's a Venus exterior conjunction. She can't make opposition because her orbit is between Earth and the Sun. So instead, 2 types of conjunctions. That exterior conjunction, the other side of the Sun, always in direct motion, and the interior conjunctions between Earth and Sun. The next being 584 days since this last, August 15th, 2015. That will be in the sign of Aries on March 27th, 2017. Alright, we're going to watch the Venus Synodic cycle develop over time, beginning with the Venus-Sun interior conjunction. In fact, we're going to begin with this one. This is one of the rare Venus transits. This was June of 2004. Venus can actually be seen crossing the solar disk. And if you're lucky, you get 2 of these in a lifetime, and in yours, they were June of 2004 and June of 2012. They will always be 8 years apart for reasons we're about to see. So this is that Venus interior conjunction to the Sun, the Venus transit, June 8th, 2004. Take the other planets away to make this easier to see. We know this is a Venus interior conjunction because Venus is retrograde, which is designated by red numbers in Sky Engine, right? This means Venus was passing Earth, and therefore between the Earth and Sun, and therefore an interior conjunction. Later in that cycle, an exterior conjunction. Venus's numbers are black here. This means direct. If Venus is conjunct the sun in direct motion, that means she's on the other side of the sun, exterior conjunction. But for now, we're just going to look at the interior conjunctions. So the next after the Gemini interior conjunction of June 2004 would be 584 days later, which was in Capricorn, January 2006. 584 days after that one, in the sign of Leo, August 17th, 2007. The next 19 months later, in the sign of Aries in 2009, then Scorpio in 2010, and back to Gemini in 2012. Notice this shape. 8 Earth years, 13 Venus years, 5 exact interior conjunctions of Venus to the Sun, making this sacred form, the pentagram, which is aligned to sacred geometry, right? The golden ratio, the pentagram, or the 5-petaled rose. And we see this all over the place in nature and in the mysteries. If we tracked 5 consecutive exterior conjunctions, which also would be 8 years, almost perfectly, we would still draw a pentagram. Or any phase of Venus to Sun, say 20 degrees earlier in the zodiac than the Sun, if you track that phase over the course of 8 years and draw lines between, pentagram, all right? 5-petaled rose. So notice that the Venus interior conjunction in the sign of Gemini in 2012 was slightly retrograde shifted from that in 2004. June 8th, 2004, the 18th degree of Gemini. June 5th, 2012, the 16th degree of Gemini. It shifts about 2 degrees retrograde in the zodiac every time it repeats, right, which will always be 8 years later, or about 8 years, because it also shifts about 2 or 3 calendar days earlier. So let's watch that over time. And what you'll notice is that the entire pentagram is slowly retrograding through the zodiac. And what I'm most interested in my investigation, which I very much look forward to bringing forth as this 13 flower journey moves along, is times like this. See, this is a Libra interior conjunction in the 29th degree, though 8 years before it was in the sign of Scorpio. Venus will do this in a sign of the zodiac for about 104 years, and then she will shift. And so what is the archetypal ascent of the global goddess associated with those shift points? You'll see another one here, March of 2041 in the 29th degree of Pisces, after Venus had explored Aries for about 104 years. What does that mean? Especially here, right? This is at the vernal equinox point from Pisces to Aries, the place of resurrection. What will that bring to us in psychological correspondence and spiritual alignments? So here's those shift dates of the interior conjunctions from Aries to Pisces in 2041, from Scorpio to Libra in 2034. But the archetypal energy might shift before then. A shamanic astrology, visioned forth by this man, Daniel Gemario, who in many senses was the first one to return these Venus synodic cycles, and especially their correlations to the mysteries of Inanna, to the astrological fold. In the 90s, we track the beginning of a Venus synodic cycle not with the interior conjunction, but with her heliacal rise. This is when she's retrograded about 10 degrees separate from the sun, and it's the first time that she can be seen in the morning sky. This is what the Sumerians were tracking in the Venus tablets of Amasuduka. This is what the Mayans were tracking. So this is what we track as sky astrologers. Look at this beautiful image of Venus as morning star. by the great astrophotographer Gary Caton. You can see many of Gary's images at dreamastrologer.com. This photo was taken June 16th, 2012. Venus is an early morning star, very early in her cycle, which in many senses began with the interior conjunction June 5th, 2012. But if Gary had taken a photo of Venus at that time, it would have looked like the sun, right? Because she was conjunct the sun between Earth and the sun and therefore blinded by the glare of the sun. It's like this question. Say this is a new moon. Is it a new moon? Moon between Earth and sun, which can't be seen? Or is it a no moon? Is this the new moon? That sliver of a crescent, just when the moon in its cycle has separated itself far enough from the sun to be seen. Diana's bow. So this current Leo-Venus synodic cycle, with the interior conjunction on August 15th, 2015, this was the inception of the Leo goddess, a word I first heard from Adam Gainsbourg's work in his Light of Venus. And that happened on the West Coast just after noon, so Venus and the sun were near the top of the sky, and of course Venus could not be seen. It's around noon, right? So it's bright out. Even with her rise the next day, she could not be seen. She's still too close to the sun, blinded by its glare, under the beams, in the underworld. Or in the story of Inanna, her visit to Enki in the Abzu, in Eridu, to receive the holy me. It takes Venus about 7 or 8 days to retrograde 10 degrees from the sun, which will bring to us her heliacal rise, when she can first be seen in the morning sky, just for a moment before the sun's glare takes her bright light from our eyes. And in this current cycle, with this average 10 degree separation for heliacal rise, this happened on August 22nd, 2015. Now this is the birth of the Leo goddess. Inception at interior conjunction, but birth at heliacal rise. So if we honor heliacal rise as the start point for the archetypal shift of the global goddess, then these shifts from Scorpio to Libra and from Aries to Pisces are going to come to us much sooner. Okay, 2018, very soon, the first Libra heliacal rise, after she's been doing it in Scorpio for over 100 years. And then in 2025, shifting from Aries to Pisces. So the pentagram is shifting now. The heliacal rise pentagram from 1974 to 2018, Aries, Gemini, Leo, Scorpio, Capricorn, and pretty soon, coming to a theater called You, 2018 to 2060, Pisces, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Capricorn, shifting from Scorpio to Libra, and from Aries to Pisces, because they move retrograde, right? And that one across the vernal equinox point. Now consider this. If we honor planetary associations, traditionally, both Aries and Scorpio were ruled by the planet Mars. So in this pentagram, and really in the pentagram since the 1920s, 2 of the 5 Venus points have been in the Martian signs. So shifting from Scorpio, Mars, to Libra, Venus should be rather significant for the goddess. And on the other side, shifting from Aries, Mars, into Pisces, Jupiter, or Neptune, if you want to go new school. Now, if we go back before 1974, one more thing to show you, because this Leo-Venus synodic cycle by heliacal rise began then. Okay, before 1974, we see Virgo, which shifted to Leo, and also Aquarius, which shifted to Capricorn. The heliacal shift of Capricorn to Aquarius was in 1974, and of Virgo to Leo was in 1975, which happens to be the year of my birth. So, to the charts. Here's my song, with far too many points on the chart for our current investigation, so let's clear some out. In fact, all we really need to see for this is Venus and the Sun. I was born October 24th, 1975, with Venus 46 degrees from the Sun, just about at her height in the morning sky during her cycle. We'll add a transit ring to look at her cycle. So the Venus interior conjunction to the Sun before my birth was August 27th, 1975 in Virgo. So inception in Virgo, but her heliacal rise about a week later on September 3rd was in the sign of Leo, the last degree of Leo. So this is the first Leo-Venus synodic cycle by heliacal rise in modern time. Now we'll move through time to watch Venus and the Sun as they dance. Every year you'll see that she returns to the sign of Virgo. And when she does, this is when we can celebrate a Venus return. But it's not a Venus synodic return, because Venus synodic return means that Venus will be in the same sign as she was at the time of our birth, but also in the same phase to the Sun. So this happens during our solar return or birthday, and it comes about every 8 years. My first being in 1983. You see that? The Sun at my Sun and Venus at my Venus every 8 years. So if I move this ahead 8 years from my 8th birthday to my 16th, you will see that same thing. This is how you can tell in a solar return chart if you're in a Venus synodic return. She will be in the same sign as she was at the time of your birth and in the same phase to the Sun, the same distance from the Sun. Again, my 24th birthday, Venus synodic return. My 32nd Venus synodic return, which is also a Mars synodic return year. You can see how Mars is not as close as Venus is in synodic returns, again, because his orbit is so much more eccentric than the very harmonic and beautiful orbit of the goddess. And now I will turn 40 this year, 2015, and it's a Venus synodic return year for me. It happens every 8 years. This one's also a Mercury synodic return for me. Mercury synodic returns come our way about every 6 or 7 years, pretty much alternating between those two periods. Not quite as precise as the clockwork of the Venus synodic return, which happens every 8 years of our lives. So if you have turned or will be turning a multiple of 8 years old between August 15th, 2015 and March 25th, 2017, you are currently in a Venus synodic return cycle, a leveling up into a higher octave of the archetype the global goddess was pursuing at the time of your birth, and therefore the archetypal pursuit you have chosen to participate with. But even if you are not in a current Venus synodic return cycle, this cycle is one for you to participate with, as are all of the cycles. We are all of the signs. We are all of the cycles. We are a global community. And now to the song of Gary Caton, born April 10th, 1968 in Fairfax, Virginia. I'll clear some points out. We'll just look at Venus and the Sun. Gary was also born with Venus in the morning sky, about 19 degrees from the Sun. And if we go back to the Venus-Sun interior conjunction before his birth on August 29th, 1967, you will see it was also Virgo. Inception in Virgo, the 6th degree. And a week later, with Venus's heliacal rise, also Virgo. So birth in Virgo. In fact, by heliacal rise, this was the last Virgo cycle in modern time. One of her points had been dancing through Virgo since 1871. This was the last, the 13th, hence the 13th flower. So my view is that this 1967 cycle was holding the goddess's pursuit of the highest Virgo mystery school truths. Can you dig that? Now let's look at Gary's solar return chart for next year, and you will see that he is also in a Venus Synodic Return, because he'll be turning 48 in 2016, his 6th Venus Synodic Return, as they happen every 8 years. If we look at Gary's solar return or birthday in 2015, you'll see it was a Mars Synodic Return, and that one's very close. And if we go back to 2014, a Mercury Synodic Return year. What's so amazing to me is this time in this Venus Synodic Return, this Mars Synodic Return, perhaps a statement of ascending to a higher octave of the yin and yang expressions in our experience, in our devotion to them, that this work of the yin and the yang is really coming in for you. So one thing you've taught me is that with the fixed and the volatile, you're meant to bring the fixed to the volatile. If things are too nuts, bring them some form. But also the volatile to the fixed. If things are too formed, bring them some nuts. And that's some of the role of the sacred sword of Mars, right?
Absolutely.
But it's this very volatile time. And this is what your research has shown to us, that we go through these periods of renaissance, these beautiful times of more kind of Venusian harmonic fixed energy, and then shorter periods of volatility.
Thank the gods and goddesses, the volatility is on the shorter end of that. I don't know how we'd be here if it didn't work this way, honestly, the more I started looking at it. So, as I said, as I got into this, I started getting stacks of papers, literally this thick, with thousands, 2,500 years of Venus-Mars conjunctions that I looked at. And I began to see this pattern that Robert Blaschke sort of hinted at, but unfortunately he wasn't around long enough to complete this work. So, I took it the next step past what he was a great believer in this Ruperti's book, Cycles of Becoming, yeah? And I love that I just have it right there at arm's length, because it's like, it's that important to me. But Ruperti told us, yeah, here's the lowdown on the Venus-Mars cycle. Basically, every fifth conjunction between them happens with Venus retrograde, and that's the one you should focus on, because the retrograde, because it's going against the flow of the rest of the planetary motion, direct motion on the ecliptic, it's not expressed explicitly, but the implicit idea here is that direct motion on the ecliptic represents sort of going with the flow, consensus reality, yeah? So when a planet's retrograde, it's going against that flow, and it provides the means for unfixing that volatility, right? To sort of detach and to make an adjustment. And so it seems very simple and very beautiful. Every fifth conjunction happens to be about every 7 years, and you get this 7-year itch, right? And so you have a chance to rather than like break up with your maid and buy a sports car, like Ruperti's saying, hey, it's all in here. You can actually make this adjustment, inside. And yeah, you might actually need to make an adjustment externally. But if it happens here first, it's going to be a much more healthy thing when it happens outside, if it even needs to, I mean, if we were to break up with people every 7 years, if no one stayed together any longer than 7 years, I'm not sure how society would function the way it does. I mean, I understand relationship dynamics are changing, and that, certainly gender awareness is much different than it was even like when Carl Jung laid out his theories of the anima and animus. But the problem with that is as Blaschke pointed out in a blog for the Mountain Astrologer, it ain't like that no more. right? There hasn't been but two conjunctions of Venus with Mars during her retrograde since the 1960s, man. So where's this opportunity that Ruperti was talking about? How are we supposed to make this adjustment? What's going on, right? Blaschke called this, he said, there's an aberration in the Venus-Mars cycle. And I just had to like figure that out. It's like, what is this aberration? And as you alluded to, it turns out that if you go back, basically there's this sort of yin-yang sine wave happening through history where you get 200 years that are very much like what Ruperti described for us. Every fifth conjunction, Venus is retrograde, and then you get actually, this happens in the middle of three conjunctions that all happen within 9 months. So you get what I call a triple conjunction, with the middle one being the retrograde. Then you'll get a series of 3 regular cycles. In other words, Venus and Mars will make 3 oppositions before the next set of triple conjunctions. Okay, so this is the basic fractal of the 200-year period that I call the Renaissance period, right? Because it's fixed. Like Venus, it's perfectly, repetition. And what you see during these periods in history is this repetition of these cultural memes, if you will. And when I say meme, I don't mean like an internet picture of cats doing something or whatever, okay? And that's cool, that's fun. I'm all about pictures of cats, the LOL cat, and all that stuff. But what I'm talking about, when I talk about a meme, I'm talking about, like, for instance, right now, the memes, the way we understand the roles of gender in society are very much in flux, right? Just, it's okay for, not only is it okay for people to be gay, but it's okay for them to get married. Who saw that coming? So now, that's a result of the volatility of the Mars period. So that what Blaschke was describing as an aberration is the natural following of this fixed 200-year period. Then for 100 years, things get crazy. You might have triple conjunctions almost back to back. That is, with only one opposition between sets of triple conjunctions. You might have triple conjunctions with 6 or 7, so that there's not so that there's not a triple conjunction for like 10 years. And this happened between about 1998 and 2008. You had this, and in the middle of that, you have this one cycle where usually it takes about 740 days for Venus to go around, and catch Mars again in the regular order of things. You have one cycle where it extends out to 900 and some days. So you have this maximum separation between these two bodies. Separation, what Aristotle would call dryness. In terms of qualities, you have moist and dry. Moist is like close, if we were being moist, we'd be hugging it out, If we were like, being dry, we'd be like, standing at arm's length saying, ah. Okay, so Mars comes along and disrupts this previous unity, these cultural norms of what? The nuclear family, for instance, these ideas that men and women have, men are the bread earners and they go out to work and blah, blah, blah. And like, that ain't true no more. It simply is not true no more. So there's a healthy aspect to this. However, at the same time, as you said, perpetual war, the prison industrial complex, in addition to the military industrial complex, and pretty much I have to see those two as in cahoots. There's a dark side to this as well, yeah, and so too much of either one is not really healthy. And so what I invited people to think about is that this period between 1998 and 2008, and an even narrower window between like 2002 and 2004, which was when we had the War on Terror, right? That was the heart of the Mars period, and there's a war on terror. I mean, this is when this research it was like, okay, this is pretty obviously like working. Like, I'm not making this stuff up. It's right there, you know.
Gary, when did the 100-year Mars period begin that we're
between
in now?
about 1940 and 2040, roughly.
Okay.
Okay, and then the period I'm talking about in the middle of that is the heart of it. It's simultaneously the height of the yang, if you will. But remember, in the Chinese yin yang, there's a little white dot in the midst of that black, right, half of the circle. So the Venus is conceived within the heart of darkness, if you will. So that during that time, there was conceived here on earth, in all of us, in each of us, a new renaissance, a new way that to unfix that volatility, to bring back, you know, to balance that volatility, because it's done its thing, and now it needs to be, you know, now we're doing what I call declining from yang. We're coming out of, you know, we're starting to chill out from the yang period of Mars and flow into this next Venus period. And so, you know, to me, that was a very hopeful message, right? Because you look around, you look at the news, and you know, just the fact that we even had a war on terror, or are having a war on terror, is pretty freaking depressing, man. But when you actually look at this cycle, it's like, well, okay, that's sort of like typical of what happens during these things, and like there is another side of this, and it's hopeful to me that perhaps we can begin to find some balance and begin to head back towards the Venus side of the scale, if you will.
And we're on our way up, and we can even see that they serve each other, right? This volatility helps us see the next renaissance, as you're mentioning.
Right.
So, Gary,
right.
What are some examples of things that have gone down in Mars periods in history that you found your way to?
Well, you can find the complete article at, or essay, I should say. It's about an 8,000 word essay. Well, the first part, it's about a 16,000 word essay. So it's like a short book. But you can find that at youngastrologers.com. The AYA, the Association for Young Astrologers. As you can tell from looking closely at my beard, I'm not exactly what you would call young anymore, but you don't have to be young to be for the young astrologers, right? So it's an Association for Young Astrologers, AYA. They recently started a new journal, and I published all this research in there. So if people really want to check it out, you can get a copy of that from their website. The second part is coming out in around the solstice of this year. But yeah, some really basic examples, like the classic example for me is when the Roman, you know, hegemony, the Roman Empire was sort of, you know, coming apart, and the Germanic kings, you know, the barbarians, from the Roman perspective, they were, you know, quote, barbarians. When the barbarian kings took over, there was two of them. There was Theodoric and Odoacer, yeah? And so and it's never good, in my understanding of history, it's never good to come first, actually, because generally speaking, it's like, I think that's why you see these things where they call for volunteers and everybody takes a step back. So this, I'm pretty sure, I can't remember which came first at the moment. I want to say it was Odoacer, and then Theodoric sort of basically waged this, 10-year war. During this same time that we're having the war on terror, there was this war between these Germanic kings, and finally, as it was ending, he invites the other king to dinner, and it literally cuts him in half at the dinner table. And then proceeds. Now, and how much of this is again, history is, often written by the victors. So
it'll be hard for the other guy to write history in that example, huh?
you know what I'm saying? So, but there was some question of, perhaps even his family was murdered and all of his soldiers, right? I mean, they literally, another great example that goes along with that is the, during a more recent Mars period was the Norman conquest of England. Yeah. The Normans were descendants of the Vikings who came along, by the way, in another Mars period. And then the descendants of these northern invaders that settled in France eventually took over England. And as you might figure, people weren't so happy about that. And they rebelled. And so what William the Conqueror did is he went in and he sowed the land with salt so that it would become infertile, and he would, and the ones that he didn't manage to, this is essentially, what's the word I'm trying to think of? The thing that we did to the Native Americans, genocide. Yeah, this is essentially genocide in that he wasn't just trying to put down a rebellion. He was like, oh, really? I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to make sure whoever survives can't eat. And we know this because there's these things called the Doomsday Books, which was a survey of England. And you go back and there's all these huge tracts of land where it literally just says waste. It's barren. And so, that's why I say, I mean, given the historical record, it's really not surprising that we find ourselves in the situation we're in. In fact, one might almost be tempted to say, well, this is almost mild in comparison, almost. It's hard to compare pain, as you know.
Unless you dig deep into potential truths. But again, coming out of that time of volatility on our way up, and we can see how the volatility serves the fixed and the harmonic and the beautiful if we zoom out and relax and take a higher perspective of the thing. I mean, so if this is a 200-year period of fixed and a 100-year period of volatile, and the volatile began in 1940, then that would take us back to 1740, right, for the beginning of the fixed period. And, some of the beautiful revolutions that are going on at that time. I mean, not to mention the Industrial Revolution, sure, that's gotten pretty out in this time of volatility.
Yeah.
But technology, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the coming of liberty and this kind of thing, this is, in a sense, stoked by the flames of the volatile, right?
Yes. It was one, you can't have one without the other, it's kind of like, and in part 2 of the essay, what I do is I trace that back to actually a couple different, actually 3 different pre-Socratic philosophers, so that you have basically different worldviews that go, philosophical worldviews that go along with these. So you have this, way back when, you have this cat by the name of Parmenides who said, basically everything in the universe is actually static, right? It never changes, an illusion, right? And because which is kind of an abstract model of reality, but it was this. He was what we call a pre-Socratic philosopher, that is before Socrates. So this would have been 500-600 BC. Before even horoscopic astrology came on the scene. Then you had this other cat, Heraclitus, who said, nah, that's all wrong. Basically, everything is change. There's nothing but change, right? You can't step in the same river twice, is a commonly quoted phrase of Heraclitus, because even though it's the same river, the contents, it might be a muddy river, it might be high, it might be low. It's never the same, even though it's in perpetual change. It's the same river, as in that we call it by the same name for now. Even that, you begin to see the flow of names and cultural identities across a region of the earth, for instance. But the people are the same people, no matter what you call them, And so it's there's this other concept of like perpetual change, and then along comes this dude Empedocles who says, "Hey, it's both, right?" Empedocles says, "A twofold tale I shall tell you. At one time it was one alone, and at one time it grew to be one alone out of many." Right now, remember, what's the American motto?
E pluribus unum.
E pluribus unum. Out of many, one. Yeah? These cats knew their Greek philosophy. So this one and the many is a fundamental philosophical problem. And then he says at another time, it grew to be many out of one, you see? So that he was telling us the basic nature of the universe is this fluctuation between one and many, between harmony and crisis, between renaissance and upheaval. And he said that the powers that achieve this there's four elements, and they're pretty much the colors of the artist's palette, if you will. It's the basic stuff of the universe. And then they get mixed together in various proportions by the forces of love and strife, right? Aries, the god of war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love.
You know what's coming in here too, in these three worldviews, we go back to the Bermudan police example, that one, all is harmony, there's no change, this is Venus rising first. One is, it's always volatile, Mars rising first, and then Empedocles, kind of them in balance, right?
Exactly.
Do we have birth charts for those three philosophers?
Yeah, we do, but I should probably not share the other two without asking them first. So
right.
We'll just...
No, I mean for these three philosophers from back in the day.
I thought you were talking about me, Julene, and Adam.
Right.
I get confused. Sometimes you flatter me so much, my head gets big. But that's a really interesting question. I doubt it. It was so long ago. It would be very fascinating to see. Well, naturally, Empedocles had the Venus-Mars opposition, right, or whatever. But yeah, so it's not just the astrology, right? You can see this in philosophy. You can see it in history. You can see it in, as I said, in life. That you'll see these principles, right before your eyes, right? These are not just abstract symbols on some piece of paper, man. I mean, they're alive, they're living principles, and they actually drive the universe, according to Empedocles. And that's why I say that if we can do this rebalancing of our own fixed and volatile, that we are actually rebirthing the universe as we birth ourselves.
Right. And now we get to the sacred marriage process, the inner marriage, right? So no yin without yang, no yang without yin. There's no point of exhaling if you're not inhaling anything. But try only inhaling. You're not going to last too long in that situation either, right? And we see how they support each other and how they blend and how they feed off of one another. And it's this interdependence, it's this empowerment of one another. But the kind of old Hermetic principles, which have been watered down to say this, as above, so below, which Gary does a beautiful service of to show that is not the original words of Hermes, but watered down that way, it's a beautiful expression, and as within, so without is this thing that's been said, and for me that means that the conflicts of the outer world are merely reflections of my inner conflict.
Right.
So, and I love this about the fixed signs, like Leo, where Venus and Mars are meeting today. Fix yourself to fix the world. Exactly. Am I going to charge out to Fukushima with the hazmat suit and the Paul Stamets mycelial network to handle the business, or do I find my inner Fukushima? How has my power become toxic? What is my addiction to old energies that are keeping me from finding free energy? And heal that so the outer world, which is an expression of us, is also healed, right? So in this time of rewriting relationship to relationship, it's not just how we relate to others. It's about our inner relationship of the yin and the yang energies.
Yes.
The hero's gaimos, yeah?
Yes. And that's the basic principle behind depth psychology. Basically, um, the Jungian approach is that, look, if you want to be an activist in the world, that's cool. But at some point, addressing the material problems is like pulling weeds, you know, you just have to go back and keep doing it. But if you get at the root of the thing and you pull the root out, then you can actually maybe cure the condition. So to attend to the inner heros to become the inner activist, is perhaps even more profound in the sense that the root of that chaos that you is mirrored outside of you is then plucked from your being, and only then can you go and actually bring harmony to something external, because you don't have that. You've plucked that root, or at least part of it maybe, from you. Yeah, there's a great saying in the Bible: before you go pointing out the splinter in your neighbor's eye, make sure you pulled the board out of yours.
I'm working on it.
Huh.
I'm working on it. So on this, in this alchemical process, in this threefold process, can you take us into that, Gary? I mean, because alchemy is not only turning base metals into gold, right? This is an inner work, a spiritual work.
Yes, absolutely. So we have the fixed and the volatile. Another way that was expressed in alchemy is sulfur and mercury, right? You have sulfur is volatile. Sulfur is like basically what we would also call spirit, or the king of spirit. The king of spirit is restless. He's like your inner architect or inner engineer, right? He's the one, and when I say he, it's because he's masculine. Now, he is in me and you, and he's also in women, right? This is not gender. It's in everybody. So that the architect is forever restless. Think of the stories of Thomas Jefferson. How till the end of his days he was refiguring Monticello and adding and changing. And so that's the nature of the inner architect, is to constantly try to refine and thinking of the future. And whereas the queen of soul, she is much more about settling down and feeling in and expressing the beauty of what already is. Like, look, we don't have to change anything. It's gorgeous. It's perfect. And if we could just get in touch with that, wow, And so that's like the right and the left brain. Again, the word and the image. There's these two parts of all of us that we have. Now, that said, we generally all have a preference for one or the other. And again, this is much more complicated today than it was in Jung's time, because even in my generation, people were already starting to do, pretty much I would have to identify as what I would call the lunar masculine, right? That is, I'm sort of a, and you as well, I would think, you were also born at night, right?
I was.
You have a night chart. So that this is what you have to give the Hellenistic people great credit for. When I first stumbled onto Project Hindsight and was received warmly through the wonderful generosity of Robert Schmidt and Ellen Black there, one of the first things they said to me is, hey, forget about all that Aries stuff that you're supposed to be. You were born at night. If you would have read your horoscope column, if there was such a thing in that day and age, you would have read Virgo, man. And I was like, whoa, no wonder I always read all that Aries stuff in there, and I thought, yeah, what? There must be something wrong with me, man. I'm not like that. Like this, and I've grown to be more of that. I think that's typical, actually, of the sun sign in general, is that we grow into it. It's not something we just are. But the lunar side is more like the storyteller, right? right? Because think of Jesus, for instance, very much an example of the lunar masculine. He spoke in parables. He spoke in metaphor. And the reason for this was that no matter the level of consciousness of the listener, they could all get something out of it, right? That's the beauty of of that speaking, and that, you as a storyteller telling these stories, everybody's going to get something juicy out of that, no matter what their level of understanding. Whereas with the dialectic, there was some parts of that stuff that I just laid out about the astronomy. People are going, huh? It's like, well, so that now when we are able to actually not just be able to do both of those, right? So even though I identify essentially as lunar masculine, I also go out and I chop wood, to keep my house warm, and I do, regular, just plain old masculine type, activities, and yet I like to cook and feminine activities. So it's not just having a balance of those kind of expressions in our lives, which is great. That's a great first start. Just inhabiting both and understanding that both exist within you. It's not unipolar, right? Like you can have both. That's a great first start, but it's when we actually can come at something from both sides simultaneously. We can see from the artist's point of view the inherent beauty of something, and yet we can also see that the next step that it's begging to take. The architect says, oh, wouldn't it be just a little tweak here, and it would bring out that beauty and perfect that beauty. Yeah? That's when we're getting into this third consciousness that the alchemists were after, is when we can do both and not sort of like, have to take turns. It's the same way in a chart, a square or an opposition. A lot of times when people are first learning to integrate a square or an opposition, say, well, just take turns, right? Do one, do the other. And eventually they come together where you're doing both simultaneously. And that's where the juicy beauty of this third way of thinking comes about.
Right. Yeah, on the lunar masculine bit, besides us both belonging to the night sect, having been born at night, there's also kind of this more modern expression of where's your Mars sign for a man. And for me, it's in Cancer, not smiled upon by the old ways, but, a traditionally yin energy, Cancer. Yeah. And for you, Gary, Taurus, right?
Taurus, yeah. Evening star in Taurus. So, my Mars is actually really chilled, man. And I tend to be like a really pretty chill kind of guy. With occasional bouts of like sort of Bugs Bunny mania.
And you're Venus first, and then your Venus is Aries, right?
Yeah, Venus is in Aries,
yeah,
so they're reversed, right?
Ultimate switch that I see now. I see so often with clients that we will have the yin essence, the Venus, in a traditional yang sign, and the Mars in a traditional yin sign. And you're kind of doing it textbook because Mars is in Taurus, the sign of Venus's rulership, and Venus is in Aries, the sign of Mars's rulership. Yeah. And this is a great service to this volatility so we can bring a new balance to the yin and the yang. But I was hoping you could tell us about Negredo, Albedo, Rubado, this process.
Sure. Briefly, to get back to what you were saying, though, there, like, for instance, in my chart with Venus as morning star in Aries, right? That's a classic expression of the solar feminine. And so naturally, I would be attracted to the solar feminine in terms of the women I dated. And, for instance, the woman I was living with when I had that dream, she was a redhead, this taller than me, this huge Amazonian woman, right? Classic solar feminine. And here I am having this dream, duh, right? It's in me. And of course, I'll be attracted to that. But ultimately, that's not just the kind of woman I'm going to be attracted to and or marry. That's literally me on an internal, deeper level. And specifically, that is my pathway to the inner world, to the vast archetypal realms of the collective unconscious. That's what the anima-animus complex is. It's a doorway into, so that literally when I had that dream of Venus in the sun, that was my anima, you see? That was saying, here's the door for you to... Now, that's not a place that I want to become possessed by. It's not a place that I want to take over. It's just, as I said, the matriarchy being dominant is no more healthy than the patriarchy being dominant, right? But it represents a doorway for me to begin to pull from archetypes of all space and time, man. I can recreate myself from more than just the accident of birth. That's really what the Hieros is about. It's about understanding this symbol that the anima, or this complex, is what Jung would call, that it functions as a doorway into something huge, this wellspring of psychic energy. Yeah.
Yeah, so check this out on your chart, people. I mean, women will tend to project their Mars as to what they are attracted to, and men will project their Venus. But this is to establish mirrors to reflect what we are inside. And it's
great to have a mirror, but you got to take that back.
Right, it's been nuts in my life. I mean, Cancer Mars, right? So the masculine energy is this nurturing mother, and then the attraction is to Virgo, this priestess, who's like, oh, I love your heart, and now you're smothering me, right? So until I develop that Virgo essence in and of myself, it's going to be relationship chaos, right?
Oh, it's maddening. The fact, when you look in the mirror and you, right, like, I have to remember, like, wait, when I'm like, which hand is doing what, right? Because it's literally reversed. And that's why you see in myth, Cinderella and the mirror, right? And the power of that mirror, that it literally, to sort of take you out of, what your fixed position, and to sort of force you to change, to switch things. Try doing things with, if you're right hand dominant, try doing things with your left hand for a day. It's maddening, because you're like, how do I do this? And at the same time, it's maddening to meet your opposite in another person. They drive you crazy, then that's a really good sign. And in fact, to get back, this is a perfect segue into your point. That driving of you crazy, that divine discontent, or that, or conversely, the depression that might come along with not being able to figure that out somehow, oh, I'm having relationship problems, oh, that sucks, woe is me. That's the Negretto, right? Where we're just like, man, this is not working. It's stale. It's like, something's, and it's forcing us to go within and to recreate ourselves. What the alchemists would say about that Negretto state, rather than saying, here's a pill, now you're cured. No, they would say, congratulations. When the matter becomes black, rejoice. This is the beginning of the work. Rejoice. You have a problem. You have a spiritual problem. Hallelujah. Without that, you wouldn't be able to keep growing and keep becoming more of you. You see? So the Negretto, simultaneously, I don't want to sort of laugh it off. It can be in its most extreme form what the people in like the Stan Groff school and the shamanic schools call a spiritual emergency. It's literally like people are, in a state of like, needing spiritual CPR or something, so that, or, psychiatric help or whatever. So it's not something to be embarked upon lightly by any means. But at the same time, generally speaking, the only time it gets to be that big of a deal is when, for instance, we wait until midlife to do any of the work of the Negretto. If we wait until midlife to look at our inner opposite, to seek any balance to this dominant way of being that we've had, well, sure, we've got a lot of catching up to do. But if we can experience the Negretto in a healthy way, semi-frequently, obviously there's going to be a lot less pressure and a lot less crap that we have to, it's like cleaning your room, man. If you don't do it for months, it's going to take you a day. If you do it every day, it takes a few minutes, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So Negredo is the first stage of this process of solve et coagula, right? Break apart and then put back together. So where do we get from here?
A good breakdown results in a breakthrough, you know? Yeah, so that, for instance, when we had the first conjunction in February between Venus and Mars, right? There was this wonderful coming together at the Sky Astrology Conference, and then we all had to go our separate ways. So that as Mars started to rise first, after that first conjunction, Mars rises first, there was this break. There was this like, whoa, what do we do now? Like, that was beautiful. How do we find our way back? Oh, everyone's so far away. And so there was this sort of breakdown of like, trying to find that inner correlate to that experience, that's not available. You can't have that right now. You gotta separate from that and find some, the inner sort of correlate for that. And then what happens at this conjunction as Venus starts to rise first. So we had the solve, the break apart. As Venus starts to rise first, then it's about putting back together. So it's about taking these various pieces of ourselves, our artistic self versus our rational self. And by the way, you hear all this stuff about how, science is like, the dominant paradigm, and, it's all this, people are stuck in this rational way of thinking. But typically speaking, for New Age spiritual type people, they get the, the non-rational side, the artistic side, well. They actually need to balance the rational side, I mean, I'm giving a talk on astrology, and somebody raises their hands and says, yeah, what about aliens? It's like, okay, like that, that's not where we're at. That's
tomorrow's talk.
That's a different continent, from here. Like we're talking about this, like, so that balance a lot of times, for instance, the research that I did, I had to go in and I had to use that linear, that solve, that break apart, like break this down, like what's going on here versus what's going on here. How are they different? And I had to use the solar king, the architect to sometimes when you get an old house, you got to gut it.
Right.
Before you can rebuild it.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to, during the course of this Venus Synodic cycle, these 19 months that began in August, we will have this Saturn-Neptune square, right? And in so many ways, this is like reality versus the dream. And looking forward to that, I think we
get 3 of them, yeah?
Right, yeah. And I was starting in November, and I was going into this place of, remember when there were words without letters, and language without words, and consciousness without language, and it just took this all the way up to space, and then it was like SATURN, SAT, and he's like, you love speaking and blogging in language, and you need this, right? So learning how to balance the dream and the reality, the alphabet and the goddess, all of these things, we're going to get a really wonderful exercise with that in the inner world and the outer world coming up. And actually I'll love to try to get you back on to speak about that one.
Yeah, that'd be fun, man. That's like earth and water, right? I mean, water has no form, right, of its own. If you pour water on the floor, it'll just go wherever there's a crack. It'll seek, and so water takes on the shape of the container that it's. So if you got a poor container, you're going to get leaks. You're going to have problems, So And at the same time, if the container is too rigid and doesn't have any sort of porousness, then the water is going to stagnate in there. It's going to become this yucky mess. And so you need a healthy sort of healthy boundaries are semi-porous. Like a plant's leaves, right? They close during the day to conserve water, and then they open up at night and breathe,
I'm thinking about this drum journey I just recorded for this 13th flower thing, which is like, plug the hole in your vessel, like stop giving all the water away. But I love this semi-porous imagery.
Yeah.
So we break apart. What are the two stages of come back together, or what happens while it's apart to bring it?
Right. So to get back to the alchemy metaphor, so you have the negredo, which is a purification. It's a separating sort of. It's a burning away of all the impurities in our life. This could happen on many different levels. The very simple thing on a material level, we accumulate stuff. We have this relationship with stuff, and some people more than others tend to accumulate stuff, and the next thing you know, you're tripping over stuff, man. Or you're so attached to stuff that you can't let any of it go, so if you find that there's that something in your life that you thought you couldn't do without breaks or something, you drop your cell phone in the toilet, for instance. I had that happen to me once during a Mercury retrograde. And I didn't know about the rice thing. So, come to think of it, I'm not sure I would want. I was like, picking it up like by my fingernails and like blick in the. It was like, and instead of just running back out to the store and grabbing another cell phone and going right back to me and calling somebody and complaining how Mercury took my cell phone from me and scapegoating a god? No, I took a break from having a cell phone, and I still don't have one. I haven't had a reason to go back and get one. Not saying that everybody should get rid of their cell phones. Like, we could play a little song like that. Who was that guy? Blow up your TV.
So the dropping of the phone is the negredo, right?
That's the negredo, right?
So, but then what is it that you don't run out and buy one right away?
Well, not running out and buying one right away is allowing the wisdom of the negredo to act on your life, to separate the wheat from the chaff. That's the idea of the negredo, is like, you're carrying around dead weight. They have the same thing in Vedic astrology, when Saturn crosses your moon sign. In fact, the sign before, the sign of, and the sign after your moon sign is called Sade Sate, right? Sade, S-A-D-E, like sadistic. It's not pretty sometimes, but the idea is that you are a tree, and you have these dead branches in your tree, and if you don't trim those branches out, the wind can come and break the whole tree. But if you trim the dead stuff out, then the tree can flow and sway in the breeze. Yeah, it's more nimble and so that's what the negredo, the purpose of the negredo, is to cut away the dead weight, and to purify the life of something, even if it's just a particular kind of consciousness, and then once we go with that and we stop fighting it, and then we can get to the albedo, which is this new way of seeing that involves, right? Because the only reason it's negredo in the first place is because of the limitations of our ability to see the blessing of the situation, right? Because of our attachments, we're like, I lost my cell phone, and it's like, well, maybe there's a good side to that, maybe there's a blessing in a new way of thinking that can arise in your life, and it couldn't have happened without taking a break from that. You might still go back and get a cell phone, but in between, you might have, in the space of not having that crutch, that you might have been able to see things in a way that you never saw before.
I had this vision that the 2012 thing back in those days was going to be this solar blare that just took out all of technology, and then we realized that we have we can send a brain mail, and telepathy develops. So maybe that's the albedo of your current cell phone negredo. That, excuse me, the telepathic mind is developing. And then rubato, because you'll go out and buy a new cell phone so you can call people and tell them about it. Right? Because they might not have developed the telepathy yet.
That's all cool as long as we're not heading towards aliens.
You're right? Okay. And then we'll talk about Atlantis.
Aliens. I just don't know how to bring them into astrology, man. That's all.
I'll handle that.
I can't help you. Really?
Right. Well, so here we have, right, so as Gary mentioned before, I mean, in February, Venus and Mars came together in the very early signs of Aries at the vernal point, a place of new beginnings, a place of solar resurrection. And since then, Mars has dropped under the beams into the sun, Venus rose, and then he came up in the morning sky, and she now has come to meet him. And she will rise first, and shifting into this place of perhaps the albedo, or maybe this is even the rubato, right? The coming back together.
The albedo, the coming back together, the albedo and the rubedo. The rubedo is the final stage, which is the reddening, so that the blackening represents sort of this allowing, what they would call that is facing the dead parts, right? There's some part of your life that's dead. It's not alive. You're just carrying it around because you think you're supposed to, or you think you have to, and cutting that loose and letting it go then allows this whitening, and there's this new energy that comes in. But the whitening is just this sort of brief flush of energy. It's the reddening, it's the practice, it's the bringing that new energy and making it a part of your daily life. It's like literally the flesh in a wound, right? After first you get the cut, and then when you cover it up and stuff, how it gets kind of white around there. And then later, after you take the bandage off, it gets red again. It's like the blood comes back to it. It's so the reddening is then taking this new thing that you were able to see only because you allowed the dead weight to fall away, taking this new thing and not just being inspired by it and going, oh, wow, that's beautiful, and then going, okay, back to the same old. No, it's taking that new thing and making it real, bringing it down and practicing with it and embracing it and loving it and giving it the blood and sweat and tears to make it real and manifest.
And so here we are, albedo, Venus comes to meet him again, but let's take our time with this to find rubato. As Gary mentioned before, it's a 9-month process between their first conjunction in February and their final conjunction November 2nd in the sign of Virgo. So Venus has come to meet Mars, and she will rise above him in the east, and she'll come back down after she stations direct very soon to find him on November 2nd. And one other piece of this, if we honor latitude, which doesn't show up on the chart showing us how one-dimensional these zodiacal wheels can be, is that first conjunction in the evening sky, they were side by side, so close, it's beautiful to see. And then this morning as they rose, as Gary mentioned, they were far apart, right? And she'll rise above him, and then she'll come back down and meet him, and they will be right side by side again. So here we see, again, this solvate coagula, this break apart and put back together. We're seeing it in so many different images.
Yeah.
So being patient with this, allowing the whitening to come in, but then being devoted to our practice of the sacred marriage practice, right? So we can come back together and bring this new relationship to relationship within and see that reflected in our world without.
Yes, indeed.
And speaking of your world, be wise. Call this man, Gary Caton, and book a reading. Or if you're an astrologer, I really highly recommend taking up a study with Gary. It'll open up new windows and worlds for you, regardless of where you are in your study and practice. You can find Gary...
Or this gentleman right here, because he's constantly saying things that remind me of good ideas I once had.
An echo.
See, that's how you get praise from the elder, bro. It's like, yeah, that's a really good idea. I had that idea once.
I'll take it. And the aliens.
But no, seriously, what you said about the node coming to the Libra equinox point. That's a really great point, man. I did look at that one time, and when the nodes cross those points, well, when anything crosses those points, it's a big deal. But the nodes are a fairly slowly moving phenomenon, man. It's an 18-year cycle. And
Right.
so I was really happy to see you pointing that out to people, because like I can only cover so many bases at one time. I'm over here talking about this and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really great thing to be. I'm glad somebody's talking about it.
Yeah, and you know what I'm so amazed by at that is Jupiter coming into Virgo, right? This was August 11th, 2015, from one side, right? Direct zodiacal motion, and the nodes, which typically move in retrograde motion, coming in on November 11th this year from the other side, from Libra, crossing that autumnal equinox point, that place of balance, and then coming into Virgo. And this third Venus-Mars conjunction of this year on November 2nd in Virgo, the third Venus-Jupiter conjunction, which we didn't talk about, but there's 3 of those in 2015 too, also in Virgo. And so speaking of the practice and the devotion to the inner work, right, all of this energy coming to Virgo, what seeds are you willing to plant to grow corn at this time, right?
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, no doubt.
All right, so Gary Caton, folks, dreamastrologer.com. Gary, I'm going to drink your cup of Mercury tea, of Hermes tea, the thrice great. And this is another incredible resource that Gary offers for free, the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. He had the Goddess Astrology Podcast for a long time. I recommend going 8 years. That's a Venus cycle, right? So go back, listen to all those episodes. It's incredible. And now the Hermetic Astrology Podcast, honoring our fella Mercury, the thrice great. We're coming on to a very important time for the Mercury cycle that not many honor, and Gary has just blown my mind open about Mercury. So we will have him back on to demystify Mercury, so we stop getting played by Mercury retrograde and start playing along. Gary's wisdom there is genius. And I really recommend at dreamastrologer.com. You can do a trial subscription, and there's different forms of that. You'll find it there, and you can get Gary's stuff and dig into that Mercury wisdom and into the Venus Mars. You can also find Gary, Adam Gainsbourg, who I just interviewed, and Jolene Packard Lewis, who I will, at skyastrologyconference.com. And you can find us in space. Thank you so much for listening, folks. Thank you, Gary, so much. Love and planets. Adios, muchacho.
Adios.
Hey, man.
That was fun, man.
Dance the riddle, dance the riddle, dance.